Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aman Munglani, and I'm a Vice President of Growth Enabler Research. A little bit about myself. So I spent close to about 2 decades covering technology across various thought-leading industries or various thought-leading companies. I started off my career with IDC, where I spent a lot of time talking to vendors about their strategies, their expansion exercises, and also what is it that they want to do from a partnership perspective. And then I spent 13 years with Gartner, where I actually kind of spent a lot of time reviewing technologies, advising corporates such as yourselves in terms of IT strategies, data centers, what is it that you should be doing, partnerships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And during the later part of my career, I spent a lot of time talking to, writing a lot about startups, reviewing, what is the innovation that is happening out there. Okay, new models, new concepts, new technologies, and what is it that a startup brings to the table in terms of new innovation. But this was way back in 2008, just when things like BI, things like cloud computing was just about coming to fore. But fast forward 2013, the pace of change was so rapid that it became almost difficult to kind of stay on top of what innovation is happening in the market today. The number of startups had mushroomed quite significantly, right? And also the technology innovation that was happening out there had increased quite significantly. And also at that point in time, the noise around which startup should I work with, or rather, what kind of technology should I be deploying? Should I be working with the tier 1 vendors? And I think organizations in general went through this mood change where they said, okay, fine, I'm not happy with my tier 1 vendor. I'm willing to experiment with a new vendor or a new startup, even if that involves a certain amount of risk in terms of dealing with an unstable vendor, right? So there was a push from the market in terms of new vendor startups. There was also a pull from the market in terms of saying, I'm sick and tired of my tier 1 vendor. Give me more options, right? And that led to huge change in the startup ecosystem. There are close to about 1.7 million startups which are launched, which are introduced into the market every year, right? The confusion around which startups to work for, what to do, what not to do, is fairly evident. Let's just look at SaaS, for example. There are close to about 100,000 startups that were launched only in 2017, covering the space of SaaS. So massive changes, lots happening over here, okay? So after spending a lot of time with Gartner, and after having reviewed a lot of, discussions with end users and very, very large corporates across the Western Europe and also Asia Pacific, the startup ecosystem seemed very, very interesting, and that's when I joined Growth Enabler, right? And what we really do is we basically use artificial intelligence and machine learning to assess, new technology platforms, rate vendors, evaluate the performance, evaluate products, okay? And we've been very, very fortunate to be reviewed by some of these big names from the print and media industry, and also some of these global names, for example, Visa and Pfizer are some of our clients and have endorsed our strategy and also the platform that we have created for ourselves. So over the course of the next 20 minutes, I'm really going to be talking about what's happening in the market. What is digital disruption? What does it really mean for you? Okay? And what is it that you as an organization need to be doing from a digital disruption perspective? And I'll try and keep the advice as tactical as possible so that you actually have homework to do on Monday morning in terms of putting some of these ideas to practice in terms of where do I want to go, okay? Of course, this process has 3 steps. You have the disruptors, you have the Darwins, and you also have the laggards or the dwindlers, okay? And I'll kind of explain what the disruptors really mean. Disruptors are really the GAFAs of the world, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. These companies are innovating at a massive pace right now, all right? The combined market capitalization of the top 10 startups or the top 10 tech titans at this point in time is close to, say, $500 billion, right? Or rather, sorry, $2.7 trillion, with each of these startups or each of these companies at about close to $500 billion market capitalization themselves. These are massive figures, right? So I'll kind of talk about this in greater detail as we move along, but the point I'm trying to make is that, digital disruption is here, And you will see that happening, and you're probably already seeing that happening in your industry, and seeing some very significant change happening in terms of your processes. So what is digital disruption? It's about challenging the status quo. It's about speed and change. It's about radical change rather than methodical changes. We're talking about a complete shape shift in terms of your own strategies, and talking about fairly fundamental changes in the way you operate as an organization, from a production point of view, from a perspective of how you treat your customers, from a perspective of how you drive efficiencies within your environment. We're talking about very, very fundamental shifts. So the similarity between innovation and disruption is that it drives change, but disruption is fairly more radical than innovation at this point in time. Most organizations today tend to kind of get confused between innovation and disruption, but these are two totally different things. Innovation is more gradual, it's more piecemeal, and disruption is more shape shift, and some fairly drastic changes in terms of how you operate. So one of the key elements of disruption is that it all boils down to your mindset. 80% of any disruption that you bring to the market, or any innovation that you bring to the market, clearly lies in your mind in terms of how you want to take this forward, right? People oftentimes look at technology as the answer, but technology is not really the answer. AI for the sake of AI, IoT for the sake of IoT, or BI for the sake of BI is not really the desired outcome that you should be looking at, right? What matters really is your focus in terms of how well do I understand my organization today. What is it that I want to innovate? What is it that I want to disrupt? What is it that I want to kind of automate within my environment? What is my digitalization strategy? What is the roadmap for that I want to kind of look at for the next 4 to 5 years, or maybe even less or more, right? And this has to be constructed into smaller parts and bits and pieces which you can easily digest. That is the difference between a well-thought-of strategy and a poorly thought-of strategy. And even today, I have a lot of discussions with end-user organizations that say, okay, fine, I want to talk about AI, but the first question I ask is, what do you want to talk about AI? You want to understand technology, you want to understand how it is implemented within your organization, you want to understand what are the business outcomes, okay, but first tell me, what kind of data do you have? And most organizations don't have that answer for me. What kind of data do you have? What tiers of data do you have? These are things that you need to understand in great levels of detail before you kind of really embark on a digitalization journey. So let me give you an example. Digital disruption is also about changing mindsets. So for example, let me give you an example of Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, all right? When Eric Schmidt joined the company, he actually had to share his workspace with an engineer, okay, from the testing team, right? And the reason why he did that, while it was an accident, okay, obviously because they didn't plan for some engineer to sit with Eric Schmidt, but the point really is that in the very first discussion that Eric had with the gentleman called Amit, he gained a lot in terms of business analytics, in terms of the power of business analytics and what is it that you can take to the market, right? And the point about this is that for you as an organization to really kind of stay on top of new ideas or new initiatives, you really need to be engaging with your employees at a very, very granular level. There has to be a method to kind of gather or learn from all that chaos that is happening around you in terms of new technology, new processes, new roles, etc., 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 and pay close attention to what's happening within your organization from a perspective of new ideas and new approaches that you can possibly adopt, right? Customer engagement at this point in time is a burning hot topic of discussion. But the fact of the matter is that Apple, for example, has 114 patents, or rather 141 patents on customer engagement, even before customer engagement became a hot topic of discussion. Things like glass staircases, things like the UI on the Apple iPhone. These are things that Apple thought about much, much earlier than anybody else in the market. And that's one of the prime reasons why they're such a big hit in the market today. So over the course of the next decade, you will see a lot of change happening. You will see new ideas, new technologies, new processes, new innovation happening in the market. And you as corporates will be pushed in a way to kind of look at some of these newer approaches or actually be disrupted from the market altogether. So disruption is here to stay. And in fact, it's going to have a very, very profound impact in terms of how you operate in the market today. So let me just give you a perspective. This is of a survey that we had conducted in 2017. 90% of corporates that we had surveyed expected that industries will substantially change by 2020. Okay? 60% of audience that we had surveyed felt that, digital is the biggest threat to how they operate in the market and who they are as an organization today. And 45% of organizations felt that, future revenues will come from digital services. The fact of the matter is that digital is here to stay. It's going to have a very, very profound impact. And there are a host of other technologies, which I will kind of talk about in terms of AI, IoT, machine learning, etc., which are very, very relevant for you as you kind of plan for the future. But I think what I want to leave you over here with is that speed is of essence. Speed is absolutely critical at this point in time. Otherwise, you bear the risk of being left behind in the journey and your competition catching up with you. The point I want to make is that you as an organization need to be, okay, let me just ask you a question over here. How many of you actually have a digitalization strategy already in place? 1, 2, 3, 4 out of a crowd of 300, okay? So the point I want to make over here is that digitalization, new approaches, new technologies, these are things that you should be looking at very, very consciously, not from a perspective of just technology for the sake of technology, but also from a perspective of new customer models, new business models, new efficiencies in terms of operating margins. These are things as an organization you need to be really thinking about. So in terms of forces of change, the average lifespan of organizations or the S&P 500 companies has actually come down from 33 years in 1964 to as much as about 12 years in 2027, all right? The other point to be noted is that, out of the FTSE 700 or the FTSE 100 companies that existed in 1984, 76% of these organizations don't even exist today. The point we also noted is that, global unicorns were close to about 30 or 40 in 2014, and that number is close to about 300 at this point in time, actually 360 to be precise. A number of CVCs globally is about 140, at least in 2014, and now we're talking about 248 CVCs at this point in time. So these are pretty massive numbers and actually kind of reflects on the innovation that is happening in the market today and how CVCs and venture capitalists are investing in startup and looking at the next billion-dollar idea coming from the startup world and basically looking at opportunities to grow the market over there. So just kind of shifting gears, talking about Industry 4.0, I spoke about these various different technologies that will obviously have an impact in terms of how you as a manufacturing organization will survive over the next few years. So we're talking about robotics, we're talking about big data analytics, we're talking about augmented reality. These are very, very profound technologies which will obviously have an impact. And I'll kind of go through the use cases across each of these technologies as I move along with my presentation.